my channel. And is it live on your channel? Oh, studio? Uh, it- we're starting now, so welcome everybody. If you could mention in the chat if you can hear us okay. Hi, Dad, I'm the first person. Okay, it's my son. Do you have to hit start recording at all, or does that work? Sounds clear. Okay, great. All right, so we are live. I Do you think it's okay to have that screen? Probably okay for now. While you go full screen, I'm not sure. Um, all right, I'll just switch to the bigger screen there if anybody can confirm if they can still hear me. Okay, so we'll get started. So my identical twin brother, Trevor, I'd like to introduce him. I asked him to join me today just to, I thought it'd be interesting to have him come along for the live and on also any tech support. Obviously, this is our first time, so welcome everyone. And I don't know if the chat is showing up in the screen. If you can see the comments kind of coming up on the screen, it should be what it looks like. Okay, so you want to go, basically, it's that whole window. Yeah. Okay, well, we'll go to just realizing I want to be able to see myself, which is a little bit interesting when I go do a screen share. Anyways, it's fine. We'll jump to uh, some of the questions that I got from email. And just a second here. Okay, so Ian's from the UK, and he says, "Is the Nighthawk the best speaker you have designed so far? And how does the Nighthawk compare to your co-entrant horn design?" So the co-entrant horn design that he's referring to is the 1416 that we developed a few years ago. And full disclosure on that one actually is licensed to another business, and it's Kinnaman Audio, and they're working on developing a full kind of speaker system based on that co-entrant technology. Um, so it uses the ViaWave ribbon tweeter, and and then also the ScanSpeak 10F drivers. So differences, they're very similar. Okay, the Nighthawk is providing close driver spacing, time alignment, and that. And so the Nighthawk probably would have a bigger presentation by virtue of it having larger horn mouth area, and it has more drivers. So the Nighthawk has four drivers. And so the soundstage width on the Nighthawk is going to be wider due to the wider coverage in the upper frequencies. So the hourglass shape is specifically designed so that the high frequencies are have a wider coverage compared to if you have a co-entrant with a one large horn. So the difficulty with the co-entrant designs is trying to get wide off-axis coverage in the treble. A way around that is to do a constant directivity type of horn, more of a conical horn instead of exponential. But that presents a lot of problems. I've been trying to develop myself a constant directivity horn that actually sounds as good as the exponential horns in terms of clarity. And I just haven't been able to get there. The bottom line when it comes to a design is that the horn needs to be completely clean and free of any horn coloration. That's goal number one. And obviously, speaker design is a juggling act of various attributes, but priority if the horn has any type of coloration as far as diffraction and first or second order reflections, then it's game over in terms of it having the level of clarity and overall musical enjoyment that one would expect. So the trick I think with synergy is making sure that you walk that fine line of ensuring that you're not introducing any kind of resonances or coloration into the sound. And so I've personally found subjectively the exponential horn flare where it starts out with um, a
Narrow
slow,
throat.
it's a slow flare rate. And then sorry, what's that?
That's a narrow throat,
Yeah,
really narrow, which yeah can cause some coloration.
yeah, there's no way to get wide coverage when you have a flare rate that's like a 300 hertz flare rate. And so it's gonna have that narrow tunnel aspect in the throat. And so it's not easy to kind of get it to do all those, check off all those boxes. So,
When you're looking here at, but the
oh,
camera's up here,
okay. Sorry, we'll get
so
used to it.
you're looking down at people.
Um, I might
Just look at the
skip
questions.
the questions that people have posted just for now. We'll circle back to them. Just Trevor and I have been building speakers since we were kids,
Yeah,
and we in shop class in high school, even before that. And I was thinking about before I came on with the live stream about some of the stories of the stuff that we did with speakers. And it's kind of it begs the question, like, why speakers as an interest? And I have no idea, right? Like,
yeah.
it's just,
Well, we were tearing apart stereo equipment when we were like 10 and figuring out how it works, and
yeah.
even stereo equipment that we didn't own. I remember our big brother's
uh,
stereo. We ended up
Here's your coffee, by the
oh,
way.
thanks.
Coffee. And then a little baggie
Yeah,
of
Randy.
candy. So I was thinking about when we were 12 years old, and the our farm, we grew up on a farm and I had employees. uh about that time I had maybe 3 or 4 employees, and there was basically uh, a nearby area where they had put cars, just whether they were decommissioned or needed repair. There was tractor trailers, farm equipment, and Trevor and I went back and we started hunting for like the speaker drivers to take out of the vehicles. And there was a transport, and we pulled the headliner down. And
I don't remember this.
you don't remember that? Do you remember taking the speakers out of Ross's car?
Oh, I remember vaguely and being very upset that we took them
We
out.
never admitted to it either.
Oh, really?
So one of the farm's employees had
A
left
spare
left
car.
one of his broken cars at this area. It was an old farm in the back, and Trevor and I took out the dash on his car and took the little speakers out of his dash. And then a
Um,
couple days later, we had overheard him complaining to everybody around the farm about how somebody took the speakers out of my dash. I'm like, who would do that?
yeah,
And we're just like, do 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 do.
no, it wasn't us. I can't remember now which ones they were. They looked cool, but they were like
Oh yeah,
cheap
the Canadian
Canadian
Tire.
Tire speakers
The
from the
Yeah,
like Radio Shack speakers from the 70s.
we rode our bikes back to the area, just a few kilometers away, and I just remember having a plastic bag full of car speakers.
Yeah,
We brought them back and we had them laid out all over the bedroom floor, and we were like hooking them up and listening to what they sounded like, and
yeah.
absolutely crazy. You probably don't remember. Um, I took my dad's alarm clock apart and took the speaker out of my dad's
I
alarm
remember that.
clock. And he set his alarm. He had an important meeting. He had to get
Um,
up early in the morning and drive to a meeting, and his alarm didn't go off because the speaker was missing from his alarm clock. And he's like, "Who?" But anyways, I think I admitted to that.
yeah.
It's like, why'd you do that?
Wow.
Anyways,
So
there's
we had an intense curiosity for
yeah,
how things worked back then.
yeah. And then when we got into high school, the wood shop was an amazing opportunity to start building what we really wanted to build, and we uh we built a replica of the Eggleston Andra speaker.
Oh,
And
right.
yeah, and I'll pull that up actually, what that looks like. It was a speaker that I had seen in Stereophile.
Magazine.
Yeah, and incredibly beautiful.
That was really complex geometry to make at the time. And I remember you making one of them. And I thought, you have to make two
Yeah,
and make it match.
took like a year.
Usually when you build speakers, you build them in pairs so that like
Yeah,
all the panels are the same, but you built one complete speaker and then you were obligated to build a second one.
yeah, we made it out of
You see that? Oh,
there's quite a
yeah,
delay. It's gonna go
there it
smaller
is.
with
Yeah.
my
Yeah, very complex geometry. And then we ended up hearing that at the Toronto Audio Show, that speaker. I think it's a couple $100,000.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So I was car audio subwoofer, 15-inch JBL, and then I had harvested the tweeter and woofers out of another the Mirage
Bipolar,
bipolar
but they were,
speakers, and you know used the drivers into this to make a replica as MDF, and then we painted it black, and yeah, it was hilarious. I wish I had taken pictures of it because
yeah,
I had it set up for quite a while. But yeah, the geometry with the miter saw and
yeah,
everything was a nightmare.
$200,000 and for a brand for those speakers, and you built it for probably $100.
Yeah, but I don't think it was quite the same. It
Not
was,
the same.
I think these are
No.
made out of slate and that, but yeah, that was like grade 11, grade 12, I think
Yeah.
it was. But
And I remember when I was first married and we got our first we bought a schoolhouse. This was 25 years ago, and I had gotten I wanted to make big sonotube subwoofers to put in the corners of the living room. And I went to the place where you get the big concrete sonotubes. I was going to put subs on the end of it. And I remember the guy said, "Oh, you can only get 15-inch sonotube and they come in 30-foot lengths." With the 30 feet long was the smallest sonotube I could buy. So I bought it and I cut it in half. So I had two 15-inch sonotubes that were 15 feet high in each corner of the living room. Needless to say, it didn't have a great wife acceptance factor at that time. Even when we put it in fabric cloth or on the outside, it
yeah,
tended to hide a little bit better. But that was incredible, the amount of bass that those things made with an open end with a 15-inch sub on the other end.
yeah,
So
we're definitely bass junkies when it comes to that. We've done a lot of full range driver projects. You've done a couple
mhm.
headland designs, and really the uh, thing that got us into horn speakers was I had started a job as a product designer for Adamson Systems Engineering. This is back in like 2004.
Pro.
Pro audio, yeah. And so I was developing stage monitors and line arrays and subwoofer cabinets and things like that. And I had an opportunity to hear some of the compression drivers, and at that time it was just starting out with the advantages of constant directivity with the oblate spheroidal uh, horn technology, and I took a lot of the stuff home and did open baffle, 15-inch coaxial, and tried to do up my own crossovers. So that's like over 20 years ago. So that got me onto, the dynamics and the clarity that some of the really good pro stuff can offer. So then that's kind of what
Yeah,
started
I
us into that,
remember,
right?
I think up to that point, we had always just been into mid-fi stuff,
Hmm.
like generic uh, budget stuff. And it wasn't until we heard pro audio. And I think at the same time, we'd always had like NAD amps and that sort of thing. Were
Mm,
class AB, they were okay. But then we started getting the chip amps were coming onto the scene, and
mhm.
even like cheap computer speakers had little chip amps, and we're fascinated by those. Like, why does a little cheap computer speaker with a chip amp in it sound
Mhm.
way clearer than a mid-fi AB receiver? So that's when it started. That combined with like a full range or a compression horn or something like that, and you're like, oh man, this is like so musical
Yeah.
and so real life.
On the tube amp side of things, you would often rip out the amplifier out of old consoles
Yeah,
and the old
yeah,
Telefunken
yeah,
consoles and rig them up as a stereo and things like that. And then yeah, so some stuff,
yeah.
an old Philips console. There's some interesting aspects to some of that older technology and the driver parameters. But anyways, I'll just gonna do a quick check of the chat just to see who are the people who influence your designs, especially the mid-horn. Um, so I think it started when I started getting into horns. I started out with the oblate spheroidal, which is like a conical technology. And so I decided to just experiment with different horn geometries. And I did a small little like cliche horn and immediately noticed right away that there was improved clarity and overall smoothness to that sound. And so I think from then on, I was kind of captivated by that type of a flare where you have it, the smooth uh, exit with the smooth curvature on the horn mouth, and realizing that the horn coloration that's common to a lot of other designs is kind of the main enemy there. So, uh, and then the biradial came out by, the recognition that for multi-way, at least, you need to have the drivers closer together because that's a major pitfall. The drivers are spaced too far apart or they're not time aligned and that kind of thing. So influencing my designs. I mean, I'm inspired by just growing up reading all of the magazines like Legacy Audio, their massive open baffle. Um, I mean, just
Mm.
I don't know if there's any others like
I
that.
think the old school Western Electric Altec.
Yeah.
There's the the vintage side of things for sure, where it's I know for me, we have a local theater here and the Regent Theater. And one of the guys that manages the theater gave me two Altec A7s, voice of the
Mm,
theater speakers, and they were collecting dust in the basement for the last probably 40 years. And I restored them and got them going, and that was even a bigger glimpse into what the potential is in terms of that natural, clear horn sound. And A7s are certainly not free of coloration, but you kind of put up with the compromises knowing that they're providing a bit of a lifelike sound.
mhm.
I would say with Troy speakers, they do provide a lot of the. Is it Troy or Joseph? It's Troy. Is it okay? It's Troy and Trevor, just so you know, and we go by both.
Trevor
We go by
and
both
Troy.
names. Um,
We should have a stereo mic too.
yeah,
It's the same
you're
one.
not seeing a 3D or Duke mirror image here. No, but I was going to say that like Troy's designs provide that all the benefits of a horn system in terms of the dynamics and clarity without the coloration. And that's one thing that I think Troy's pursuit has been is get kind of the no compromise of
Mm.
both worlds, so to speak.
Yeah, and you were using the A7 in your home theater up until about a year ago, and
Hmm.
you've had the Sabrin 1309 speakers, which is a
Yeah.
DIY plan set that's a large format horn, and it sounds really good.
Yeah, it's basically the same dynamics and same amazing clarity, especially in the vocal region, but without the
Yeah,
horn coloration.
and you raise the horn up to ear level because you have uh risers
Yeah,
with your seating in
yeah,
your home theater.
yeah,
So um, the home theater continues to be something that I'm going to continue to offer plans for. There's a conical horn. It's up on a giant stand right now. I can just show you just a second here what it looks like. You can see it there. So there's a conical horn that's currently being developed, and the idea with that is that it can be used for home theater. It's very easy to build. Sorry, I just screwed up my. Yeah, so it's very easy to build. It has a 3D printed throat, and being able to do like an LCR behind your projector screen and using a 1.4-inch computer driver. I want to be able to turn that into a plan set there. So future projects.
Well, so one question is, what's your favorite 15-inch woofer and why?
Well, you can answer that one first, and then I can tell
Well,
you what mine is.
um, my favorite is the Altec 515. Um, I've had experience with the 416 as well, but the 15 with the larger magnet or QTS tends to have like it acts like an 8-inch mid-range. It's 15, and
Hmm.
it just has amazing slam and that mid-range like snare drum, like just incredible, while still maintaining great vocal lower mid-range. And if I could afford it, I'd be getting 515 beats the Alnico ones, but I think the Bima's approach that isn't the ones in your horn that you design. They're
Yeah,
very close in my opinion.
yeah. Um, so the Bima 15LX60 V2 is used 95 speaker. I continue to try to find other 15-inch drivers that could excel that. I have found one driver that does measure slightly lower distortion, and it's the JBL 2226. And I have the J, which is the 16 ohm version. So I bought that with the intention of doing like a dual 15. And so I did a direct comparison of that against the Bima, and the harmonic distortion was slightly lower for that one, and I think it may be by virtue of the motor on it is noticeably larger, heavier magnet on that, and so that could only mean good things for overall sensitivity, and the parameters are ideal for horn loading as well. So there's that. Um,
So, um, do you think it'd be possible to encourage BNC to make an audiophile diaphragm with a copper voice coil
mm,
or copper shorting ring? Is that what he means? Or no, copper voice coil?
Um, it's quite an investment to get them. They have to do a production run, and you're talking about 50 to 100 drivers and we only do, maybe 20 pair a year of various sizes. So, it's not really in the cards in that sense. I have considered reaching out to CS to see if they would do a lower QTS version of the woofer that we used 1680 speaker. Um, I've heard that they're open to that type of a customization, and so the idea with the lower QTS is to potentially do a backloaded horn on that because I just love the subjective nature of that particular woofer. So but I've had limited success. I've reached out, I think, a number of times to various manufacturers, and it's just not worth their time, right? So it's difficult. That's the main challenge, really, is finding a particular model that works for what you're trying to do. And so, yeah.
Do you want to make it big screen at all? Can you?
Oh,
Because
yeah.
we're just like in the bottom quarter. I
Right.
would say also like a pro audio company, they're dealing in huge volumes, and for a small hi-fi audio file,
Yeah.
that's just their time,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
The um, open baffle speakers or horn-loaded speakers. Um,
Yeah, get that a lot. Like there was a question actually here about the baffle versus wide baffle.
mhm.
Um, so just want to make sure I'm covering. Yeah, so Richard asks, could you talk about your opinion on wide baffle versus narrow baffle and how they relate to horn drivers and regular speaker drivers? Okay, so I was thinking about this question and I remembered back when I had bought an 8 inch, at the time it was like a hemp cone full range, and I didn't really have a cabinet to try it in. And so I just mounted it to the side of one of my speakers, which made it a wide baffle. And I was immediately taken back by the lower, I guess, lower distortion through the male vocal range. There's like a boosting effect, that really gives it really good body and presence to the vocals. And so, if you go back on my old blog from, 10, 15 years ago, there's quite a few projects where I did wide baffle, and it just seemingly took a bad driver and made it good. I know, like, for example, the Fostex 6.5 inch full range, the FF 165 WK. Um, I was struggling with that driver, getting it to sound good. I had it on a narrow baffle, and then just one day I'm like, well, I have these spare cabinets. I'm just gonna plunk it right in the middle of a foot wide baffle, and like instantly it just makes it sound so much better. And I think,
Could it be that the peaks and dips in the frequency response are caused by the edge diffraction of a narrow
yeah,
baffle or a sharp edge,
yeah,
where a wide one you're going to be alleviating a lot of those
that's a
issues?
factor as well. If there are edge diffraction artifacts, the sound is traveling further away, and so those artifacts are attenuated down, and so they're not as severe. So I just think if there's anything else to cover on that topic.
Yeah,
Uh,
I would only add that the trend is narrow, tall speakers for aesthetics, primarily to fit in the decor of a typical living room. And wide baffle tends to be more of the vintage, old school look
yeah,
that isn't as acceptable in certain
there is a
environments.
case to be made for like ultra narrow, where it's literally the width of the driver, where there isn't even a chance for artifacts to occur. And so the that is a reasonable approach in that it does work. Um, but the challenge is that you don't get any gain from the baffle. And so the woofer is having to work extra hard to achieve that same output SPL. And so I think maybe that's where I was finding, a shortcoming, is that the driver was, had to work really hard and you're into the distortion range. When it comes to full range drivers, at least, you're always trying to, you can hit the limit very quickly as you turn up the volume, and it just turns into nastiness. And so anything you can do to help that full range driver, achieve a higher efficiency, then you're winning, and it can be the difference between good and bad, I find, in most cases.
Yeah, especially if you're having to implement baffle step correction
Oh,
and then you're pushing it.
yeah, baffle step is something you have to handle very carefully and not do too much, because you could easily offset that balance where the driver is then just into like 1 or 2% distortion, and it's no good. You just lose all sense of clarity in that. So, but that's actually like I meant, like in the most recent video with the dual tens, getting that boundary reinforcement is the main driving decision there for the dual woofers, and that's what we're getting. We have the speakers, the 2800, set up in this 1,000 square foot shop, and it's just room filling vocals. Like Ray LaMontagne, the mastering on Ray LaMontagne, there's hardly any compression on his vocals, and so it can easily push a woofer into distortion if you're even at just regular listening levels. And so I'm finding that with the dual tens arranged horizontally, it's a more effortless sound, and his voice has like the proper dynamics, and there's not compression occurring there. So
Yeah, I know with the Altec, it's similar to an Altec design, the 9422 to the dual 12s. And I
yeah,
know the engineers with that tried to match the polar response of the two 12s with that
yeah,
critical crossover point
yeah,
with the horn. So is that part of this
yeah,
design as
absolutely.
well?
So you get better pattern control with the woofers flanked horizontally, in that the baffle is about 2 feet wide. That's going to give you pattern control down to about 400 hertz, which means that you're getting most of you're getting mostly direct sound at the listening position. And then below that 400 hertz, then it's going to be omnidirectional, and you're going to get a lot more room reflections in the vocal range, which is really not what you want. You want, you know, I would say like 80% of the sound coming towards you as the direct sound. And I find that when that occurs, the clarity just goes up and up and up.
Hmm.
And that for me is what I prefer. That's like a whole debate on, omnidirectional versus directional, and narrow versus wide coverage. So the speakers that I design, I really do try to target like an optimal, it's around 90 to 100-degree coverage. And so it's not narrow. It's still like relatively wide, but it's controlled. So if you go off that, if you're going 50 degrees off axis, then it should drop, minus 6 dB, minus 10 dB, and create a really good balanced sound as far as the power response into the room, the overall, like with these 2800 speakers just cranked in the shop. You walk around the shop and the sound is balanced no matter where you are. Like it doesn't change either on axis or way off on the other side of the shop. Like it's the timbral balance of the vocals is like pitch perfect.
Hmm.
Can't take.
I would add that having the two woofers up close to the horn with that,
Yeah, and driver spacing.
it's very coherent. It's almost like a dual concentric
Yeah,
driver where even from a few feet away you can't tell where the highs are coming from versus the lows. Like
yeah,
it's completely integrated in, which
yeah.
I tend to be able to pinpoint that pretty easily. But in this design, it's very coherent where you can't tell where the sound's coming from in that regard. So
Mhm.
there's a couple more questions. One, um,
While he's
yep.
looking, I'll just touch on that a bit more. I was asked about the time delay issue between the woofer and the mid-range driver because in the 2800 design, I'll just pull it up here because it's.
You might have to make us smaller. I don't know if that's possible. So I'm just reading through the questions. Do you have any projects in the works with the Purify drivers?
No, no, we don't.
Okay. The other question is field coil drivers. I do know you have experience with those. So
Yeah,
what's your opinion on them or experience with field coil drivers?
it's very interesting. I continue to be fascinated by field coil. Um, One thing that I noticed, I was taking apart the DCM 50 to change it from an 8 ohm to a 16 ohm diaphragm, and it's a completely different compression driver configuration. That the motor is at the very back, and so it occurred to me that you could actually easily turn that into a field coil, and and even if the coil didn't have the same magnetic power, you really are putting a pretty significant L pad on it anyways to bring it down. So that's something that definitely want to consider in the future. On a technical level, why field coil is so popular, I'm not sure. That's something again that I think that I could continue to test. Like we did the Supervox 15-inch field coil versus the Bema, and the Supervox came out with higher distortion, but I mean, that was just one case, right? So I think continuing to look at more comparisons and try to understand that further, what types of distortion are you, what's a relevant metric to look at when comparing field coil versus fixed permanent
One
magnet?
thing, one thing we liked with the field coil was the flexibility and how much power you send in the field coil,
Yeah,
and that totally changes the parameters of the
yeah,
driver.
yeah. It's flexible in that sense. Yes, absolutely. The other thing that I want to revisit, and I have not published anything on this. I had started to develop a ironless driver where there's no metal in the driver, and it's an array of neodymium magnets around the voice coil, and that is an interesting idea in that if you remove the iron completely from the motor, then you do eliminate a lot of the issues. You look at the Purify technology and the lengths that they're going to copper plate the hell out of everything to, reduce the, um, inductance uh, with driver diaphragm position, all these other attributes they're trying to, deal with because there's metal in driver. If you eliminate the metal altogether and just have magnets around the voice coil, then that I think has huge potential, especially on compression drivers where you already are putting a fixed resistor L pad to bring it down anyways. And so you don't necessarily need to have, 1.9 Tesla in the gap, right? So okay, so just going back to this, you can see here, this is a side profile of, I don't know if you can see it. Yep.
Yeah, that
Okay,
looks
good.
good.
So the driver offset here between the woofer and the diaphragm of the DCM50 is 185 millimeters there. And so it's like, well, that's going to, create a huge dip. It actually doesn't. And the reason is because if you look at the group delay here for that particular driver, and you look at where the group delay is at the crossover region, it's zero point 0.2 milliseconds, which is 200 millimeters as far as the time it takes for the sound to travel, as a result of that delay. And so you're actually putting the woofers ahead on purpose, so that you account for the group delay in the woofer at the crossover point. And so I was able to confirm with my actual frequency response measurements that it's perfectly flat through that 500 hertz crossover region. So I think group delay is something that people often completely ignore, and they just strictly look at, okay, well, the drivers need to be physically time aligned and you're done. Well, no, the acoustical centers need to be accounted for, the actual acoustical centers. So okay, so next question. I saw
Yeah.
somebody asking about the triode.
A lot of questions about making plans available. So
Yeah.
1965s. Sorry, it's just moving on me. So the open baffle 1695. Will that ever be made
Hmm.
available?
Um, it's available by request. Um, it's a bit of a balancing act as a business to ensure that the people that are building it as a DIY project are in fact DIY.
And not commercial interest.
No, not
No.
that. It's
Oh,
I've encountered situations where they'll just outsource the entire build and they're not DIY. They're just regular audiophiles that are just looking to get it cheaper.
oh, okay. Yeah.
I'm like, if you're going the extent of commissioning a machine shop, to spend a week machining the baffles, like why not support my business, the one
Mhm.
that designed it, right? And so I can pull that up for people to see. So what I did to circumvent that is I have a kind of a DIY version of the open baffle where the baffle is made with manual woodworking. You can make it out of solid hardwood, you can make it out of um, you know, plywood.
So it's not as complex.
Yeah. And so you make the basic baffle, and then we offer the 3D printed horns that install into the baffle. I should know the name of it, but I don't off the top of my head. We've sold a couple of the plans. Let me just.
And one question is the Nighthawk plans will they ever be available? Those are pretty complex to make. I don't,
I don't think people realize how hard it is to actually build these. Like,
yeah.
it's like 10, like one piece is like 10 days on the CNC. Like, it's,
A good
um,
question that I know, Troy, if you go back into some of the videos, you did a kind of a video on what to expect if you're sending some of these
yeah,
drawings and designs to a machine shop or a wood shop.
yeah.
And you can't just send the files and be, can you make this? Like it's very
I
complicated.
honestly, I could count on my hand how many people have actually had success commissioning a shop to make something for them. It's just, it's this stuff like the ES bi radials, these open baffles require multiple setups and it requires a very high skill level, not just running the CNC, but also with the programming. And so if you're going to find a shop, they need to have very high skill level. And usually, if they have that level of skill, they're not going to be open to just doing walk-ins off the street. And they're going to charge, they're going to basically say, they're going to give you a
A
go
go
away.
away price.
Yeah, yeah. Like, and that happens a lot of the work that I do is a result of customers saying, "Listen, I tried various places and they quoted me X number of dollars. Can you do it?" And I'm like, "Usually I'm cheaper, right?" Like it's so that's where that's at. Okay, I don't know if you can see the drawing here. Okay,
Yeah.
so this is 2112. Okay, so the dimensions are the same as the 1695 open baffle. It's got the beveled front edge. It's got the 9-degree kind of tilt to it, and the horn gets 3D printed and then installed um, into the front baffle. So there's the drawings for the support legs.
So that's 3D printed.
Yeah. So when you order the plans, you get the PDF drawings, you get the schematic for the crossover, and then you get the STL files for the horn. So the horn is made up of the mouthpiece and then the throat piece. And so the throat piece is shown here. And the reason for the throat piece is so that you can actually mount the driver and it's relatively easy to print. Um, so this is what the throat piece looks like.
And that'd be very hard to make out of wood on your own or even a machine shop. It's much faster and cheaper just to have
Yeah,
somebody
so the
3D print
idea,
it,
I
right?
don't provide the IGES or the step files because I don't really want people taking it to a machine shop. I really, it's like, this is a situation where you're DIY, you're on a budget, you really want the open baffle speakers. Well,
Hmm.
here you go. I mean, that's my roots as far as
Yeah.
the
Like
DIY
you,
side. So I want to contribute to the community. I've got hundreds of hours in developing it, but I'm offering it to those that actually, don't have the means to buy the turnkey build. So this I'll just show you what the horn looks like. So it's got the opening there for the compression driver for the studs and that, and then it has this step on it because I'll just open the model of the related to open baffle. What calculations or guidelines on how to design an open baffle are you using to consider? Like you can't really use WinISD or anything like that for programs. So what are you judging it on? It's strictly based on just building it and testing it and subjective listening and the video training series, the crossover design video series that's on my site uses the open baffle speaker as one of the main projects where I walk through step by step, starting from scratch. You have a woofer, how to develop a crossover. Yeah, like that's so with the 1695, I don't want to get into too many details on the crossover because that really is the heart of the speaker. But it's born out of listening very critically to soundstage depth and the smoothness and playing. I have a list of extremely like aggressive recordings where electric guitar, right? And that has to sound amazing. And you could easily tweak one little thing in the passive crossover and it sounds like you want to leave the room, right? And so
Mhm.
that's the heart of the speaker and that's, you know, um it's all based on testing, building. On the simulation side, I mean, literally nothing. Like
Yeah.
as far as simulating it,
In terms of
like
software that can simulate something as complex as this.
mhm. Even bass cabinet tuning with like the port length and the volume, you have to build it and maybe build two cabinets and and five or six different ports to get it to where it needs to be. Like it could be repositioning the port, it could be repositioning the driver. It's not the software side is like it's like step one of like 30,
Hmm.
right? I feel like that's
Hmm.
been my experience. Now, there might be software packages out there that are more, comprehensive, but um, I I haven't really found anything.
Yeah. There's some questions on the screen here from Bosco. One of them is our experience or your experience using passive versus active DSP crossovers in your designs, and you seem to use both. So
Yep.
you're not in one camp versus the other.
Yeah, I would say if you're if you're really after the ultimate, it's really hard to beat a really good passive crossover. Like I just mentioned about the open baffle and how, you know, you're within you're designing it, that's the heart of the speaker, and you can't just go and make an active version by inputting even like it would require the same level of development to do an active version by trying to wrestle the driver's response into the target that you're looking for. And you know, we do have the Hypex. I have the FA
253.
2253,
Yeah.
and it's used as, you know, sometimes if you really want to just get it quick up and running to understand where the crossover points need to be. I use it as a tool for that. It does sound quite good, especially on the digital input from the Weem.
Yeah, don't use the analog input.
Yeah, because it's converting it anyways. So you're really just using the AD uh, converter anyways. So just keep it digital. Um, so the Weem direct to the FA253 from Hypex is a good solution. Offers tremendous flexibility. It's very low distortion. Um, but when it comes to analog, right now I'm using a fully balanced push-pull amplifier that's a 45 bass to 45 tube based, and then I have another I have Lynn Olson's amps here as well that are a 300B push-pull fully balanced, and it's, you know, top of the line designed by Lynn and Don Sachs. And so those are top tier. They sound excellent, amazing clarity, very vibrant and dynamic. And so we're right in the middle of, you know, working on our own tube amp monoblock that's a 45 based. So that continues to be ongoing.
That was one of the questions. If there's anything you can talk more about that, the tube amp project, or is that confidential at this point? Or
No, not really. Like we have the prototypes built, we've been using them, and I'm currently uh, designing in SolidWorks the final version as far as the transformers and
component positioning?
yeah, and you know, making sure there's enough heat or ventilation through the chassis, and the chassis is going to be solid hardwood CNC machined, and I may even go as far as CNC machining, you know, the top plate out of like copper, because our one CNC machine does soft metals, and so that is an option. I want it to look really cool, just to match everything else that we're trying to do, but it is a fully balanced you know, design. And so you need a fully balanced preamp. And Dawn is working on a fully balanced preamp for me as well. So it's going to be a turnkey kind of system where I want to do the component stands, the tube amps, the preamps, the amps, and eventually I would love to be able to do a turntable. So it's as like a complete system, but it's going to take a while to get there.
Hmm.
Um, so
But that's exciting to be looking forward to that part of your business.
yeah, it fits in the ethos of what we're trying
Because
to do.
how many times do you have people asking what amp should I try or use with these
Literally,
speakers
yeah, every time somebody buys a pair of speakers, they want to know. They're also usually
in the market? Yeah.
they're buying the amplifier as well. They're making some big changes to their system and they want to know what they should get. And so it only makes sense for us to be able to offer a custom handmade tube amp as well. So it's within my wheelhouse as far as ability. Like we're already doing very complicated high quality crossovers, so it's kind of a natural thing to move into making our own tube amps, using Lynn and Dawn as the expertise there as far as the component selection and the overall circuit design and that. So
Hmm. Yeah. But just going back to the active versus passive crossovers, I think on the pro, people who are very much for the active saying it's the end all be all. there's a couple things that come to mind that you need to be concerned with. One is sometimes your passive crossovers have like a compensation network in it that isn't just slopes or anything, but it's actually correcting some things with the driver,
Well, the
right?
the every compression driver is going to have a fixed resistor L pad to pad it down between
Right.
6 to 12 dB. And so when you hook an amplifier directly up to a compression driver, it's only producing about a 32nd of a watt, like a
Mm-hmm.
fraction of
Yeah.
a watt. You're right
Yeah.
into the noise floor
Yeah.
of even the quietest amplifiers,
Right.
which like
And the
the
Hypex is 250 watts. It's designed to operate like in a
yeah,
pro audio scenario where it's usually generating some amount of
but it has 120 dB of dynamic range as far as the noise floor, but then even still, you have a 115 dB sensitivity compression driver.
yeah,
You're still into that noise floor
yeah,
regardless, right? So you got to get the amplifier up into its working range.
operating range. Yeah.
Yeah, and so I often tell people, even if they are doing fully active, still put like an 8 dB fixed resistor L pad to pad that driver down so that you get up out of the noise floor of the amplifier.
Hmm.
I continue to search for, you know, amplifiers that are uh, low power, low noise, low gain that can be used directly to a compression driver. And the shit wrecker is one of them, which
Like
is I think
2.5 watts
it's
or
it's
supposedly.
it's not even. They claim it as like 2 watts, but when you're actually playing music, which is like multi-tone, and Aaron from Aaron's Audio Corner discovered this as well. When you're playing multi-tone through Class D, the actual maximum output capability of that amp is drastically reduced because the standard maximum power rating is specified as a 1 kilohertz single sine tone and what it can,
Yeah.
what's the power at that. But music is not just one tone, right? It's multi-band, multi
Hmm.
it's you have dozens and dozens of tones all playing at once. And Class D, for whatever reason, certain Class D amps, their output capability is drastically reduced when you're actually playing music. And so with the shit wrecker, I'd have to go and look at my blog, but it was like a fraction of a watt, like half a watt output
Hmm.
before it went into hard distortion.
Yeah.
But for compression drivers, you're not even going to do half a watt, right? You're into like 0.06 of a watt. And so something that's low noise that you don't require a fixed resistor L pad is actually interesting to me. Um, so
Yeah. Um, I think that's it. There's some questions about um the process of the design stage or how you choose certain drivers, that sort of thing. Um,
yeah, that's so I know like as a business, we do focus a lot on the objective measurement. And I wouldn't say it's to a fault. It's It's, I think for me, I focus on the measurement side because as a direct sales business model, that's really the only way that you can prove objectively that your stuff's pretty decent. And then
mhm,
at the end of the day, it's okay, can the guy design a crossover where it actually sounds good? He's got good drivers, the horns look great, and as far as the measurements, can you put something together as a recipe that actually is good, right? So that's why at this stage, 5 years into my business, I'm focusing very heavily on the testimonials, and a lot of the work that I'm getting is repeat from existing customers and showing, with Don Sack's review of the open baffle, he's still going on about how amazing
mhm,
and how he how happy he is with the sound and that. So um so that's why I focus on the measurement side so much. But really, when it comes to, boots on the ground, doing the final stages of a speaker design, I've completely moved past measurements. The measurements are used to identify issues, right? So if there's like a peak at like 2.5K, and I can just do a little notch in the crossover to take that out or use some other means to address that, then that's where measurements end. And then it's on to the listening and sitting down in a critical space with, good and bad recordings in the course of
mhm,
many days and different listening spaces and listening and music is a huge part of both of our
Yeah.
lives. Like it is about for me, like okay, for example, my friend Josh was here the other day and he plays cello and I sat him down and I played Cantate. No, it wasn't Cantate Domino. It was Ray LaMontagne, Gossip in the Grain. Uh,
With the
and
flute.
it was the last song of the track.
Oh,
It
okay.
had a cello in it.
Oh, okay.
It's God willing the sun don't rise.
Right.
That specific song, and there's a cello in that song, and he was just like he was in the chair and he's just like, oh my God. He's like, oh. He's like, just like he's just, and he's an audiophile, and he said he's never heard a cello sound so real, and so for me, seeing him uh, respond that way, right? A music lover, a musician, an audiophile, respond that way, like that's the main one of the two driving forces for why I do what I do. It's about the music, it's about the experience. And that's like a personal thing, which you don't really share that much,
Yeah.
right? Because
Yeah.
it's, it's a major part of who you are. But again, like with this business, you have to focus on the technical side to achieve that. So
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, I find sometimes people who aren't audiophiles, they're attracted to like the warm sound. They don't want the super analytical or like listen to how clear those highs are. They don't get excited about that. They're about the emotion, especially musicians, like they're listening for the emotional side of it. And, like
yeah.
there's nothing better than a late night listening session where I don't know why things sound better at night, but the dishwasher's turned off and the wash machine's turned off and everything
Yeah.
just sounds phenomenal.
I find I find that audiophiles focus a lot on the upper treble detail as
Hmm.
like a thing that they're trying to pursue.
Hmm.
And I get it. Like I was like that for a number of years because the tweeter is very directional and it's presenting, a very clear sound in the treble. The mid-range, they never really focus much on the mid.
They don't know what to look for in the mid range.
It's
That's the hard
Yeah.
part.
And so for me, it's like, okay, the tweeter is basically pattern control enough that you're getting a lot of the direct sound. And so you're enjoying that clarity. And so audiophiles focus on what they like, right? They like that, so they want more of it. And so what I find is that when you go to a bigger, like to a horn speaker, you're getting not just that clarity in the treble, but you're getting it through the entire vocal range.
Hmm.
And so then it's like, oh, wow, right? Like I didn't realize there was that much clarity available. And
Yeah.
so then your focus changes. Your interests change. And it's then a lot of the recordings, you then get it as far as like, I understand now what the artist was trying to achieve,
Yeah.
right? With the layering through the critical mid-range, and
Yeah.
it's like Arcade Fire, for example. There's just tremendous layering through the mid bass and lower mid-range, and there's only a handful of systems I've heard that can reproduce what they're actually trying to achieve as an artist,
Hmm.
especially if you listen to the vinyl versions that they have. So
Yeah. And I find the ambience that are intentionally put into music to get the sense of the space in the recording and then in the room, that's part of the emotional conveyance that the artist is trying to get across as well. And I think on poorly designed systems, that's the first thing to go is
mm,
that sense of, and not just the ambience and the highs, there's like oftentimes even like a kick drum or something, you can hear it reverberate through the room,
yeah,
but you have to have really well designed system to actually pull that out of recording.
yeah. Yeah, like the Great Lakes Swimmers, when you hear the Great Lakes, it's a Canadian band and it's very well recorded. When you hear some of their songs, you can almost visualize the space that they're in based on the reflective information that you're getting down in the low level detail of the song.
Hmm.
So that's like very, that's phase information. Like go back to talking about the group delay of the woofer and using first order slopes where you can. You can't do first order on the low pass for the woofer because you have to create a symmetrical crossover slope. But when you do create a symmetrical slope at the crossover, something happens with the phase information where it's retained, and then you can hear that information about the space. So that's I think where a lot of
Mhm.
designs fail. So
Yeah, one song that comes to mind is Backstage with the Modern Dancer
yeah,
by Great Lake
yeah,
Swimmers.
that's one of the
So Great
that
Lake
sure.
Swimmers, check out that song.
Yeah,
Play it on your system with the lights off. And just think
or
about, can you get the sense of the room that they're in?
yeah, and close your eyes. It seems to elevate your hearing a bit. And then I often see a lot of people with high back chairs with their
Hmm.
with the the head cushion there. It's the same issue with speakers is that if you have an object that's close to your speakers, and this goes to Floyd Tool's work, but if there's a reflection source within a millisecond of the sound coming out of your speaker, and it's being so you hear the direct sound and then within like half a millisecond later you hear the reflected sound from that object that's physically placed near your speaker, then it your brain can't process those two images because it's coming
As separate,
as separate entities,
right?
right? Because they're so close together. And the same thing with the seat back. If the direct sound comes to your ear, but then it also hits the seat back and then hits your ear, you know, a fraction of a millisecond later, then your brain has a hard time deciphering that secondary image and separating it. So as far as speaker design is concerned, Floyd's work on small room acoustics unexpectedly helped me tremendously understand what was critical in a speaker design. So the book is about small room acoustics, but to get there, it talks about the psychoacoustic effects and how our brain is able to process the sounds that we hear in a room. But once you understand, the president's effect and all of the different attributes that our brain has in understanding sound in a very reverberant space, then you're able to focus on what really matters in a speaker design. And a lot of the stuff doesn't matter. And I get questions all the time. For example, um, with the tweeter being set right up on top of the biradial horn. And it's like, well, doesn't that create comb filtering? And it's like I go through and explain why it doesn't. And it's directly related to, the work that Floyd did in understanding how we
Perceive sound.
perceive sound. So
Hmm. One last question, I guess, is what's the biggest difference in sound in your experience with a full range driver in a horn versus a compression driver in a horn? And you've explored a couple of those things. Like the first one I think of is the paper cone or paper dome in the
in the DCM,
DCM, which is
yeah,
phenomenal.
yeah. So I'm a big fan of paper full range drivers. Like I would say 10% of them are good. The other ones are terrible. Like even within the Fostex model range, there's good ones and there's ones you clearly need to stay away from. So there's that. So if you've had experience with full range drivers and you're like, no, it's not for me. Well, um, I can the last one that I built was the wide baffle backloaded horn using the FE,
The little one,
the little one, the
80.
Wizard cone. No, it's a 108 NS.
Oh, that. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so that um so a customer had come to me and ordered the 2095 speakers, which is a big 15-inch backloaded horn, and he was without speakers for the 3 months that it was going to take us to build the speakers. So I offered to send him these little floor standing backloaded horns just as a stand-in for speakers. And once he got them, he emailed me and he just raved on about how amazing they were. And he didn't give them back. I'm like, well, you can buy them off of me, and he bought them like within like 2 minutes of sending him the checkout link.
Hmm.
So they were just prototypes. Uh, and so they sounded great. Like so the idea with the DCM 50 is taking all that's great about a really good full range driver and putting it into a horn so that you actually have smooth on-axis response and then an even off-axis response so that you have a good power response into the room. The tricky part with full range drivers is that they have like extremely aggressive narrowing in the directivity as you move into the treble. And so you're relegated to simply listening near field, or in a small room with the speakers close so that you're forcing yourself to get most of the direct sound and not hearing the reflected sound in the room, which is completely off compared to what you're hearing on axis. Um, so that's a shortcoming that you don't necessarily need to have to put up with. And so that's why with the DCM 50, it's covering the entire vocal range and it sounds just like an amazing full range driver. So which
Mhm.
which it is.
And
It's a
is it a paper cone or a
yeah,
dome? A
it's a
paper
cone.
cone.
Yeah.
It's a paper cone,
Mhm.
full range, not full range, but pretty much
Yeah.
wide band, and then in a compression driver format that is very natural sounding. Like it pairs very well with the ES curvature. I think it's very natural, and
Yeah.
I tend to I think we're both very picky about pro audio compression drivers in the sense that
Yeah.
some of them can sound pretty bad.
Most sound pretty
Most do sound bad. Um, but yeah, that's fascinating. And you've been working on projects where you've taken the paper cone, and then you got to get all the phase alignment and everything. Because the
yeah.
issue putting it into a compression driver is that it's time alignment with the whole surface area of the cone, so that it exits out the throat in a linear fashion, in a
Yeah.
time
Yeah.
aligned fashion, right?
I
That's the
mean,
challenge.
there's a lot of R&D that I don't publish
Yeah,
that's like a colossal failure. And the question,
I didn't know it was
the,
a failure. It
well,
looked cool.
the question is like, do I publish that and is it useful? And a
Mhm.
lot of people would argue yes, because it tells us what not to do. So I took the TechStream 5-inch SB Acoustics mid-range that SB was kind enough to just send to me for review. And I asked for those drivers to review, but I had kind of a secret agenda in that I wanted to see if I could create my own compression driver from it because it has the
It's in
con,
inverted
yeah, it's
dome.
an inverted diaphragm. That's just like a dome of a compression driver. So you could easily 3D print a phase plug and put it onto the front. And so the idea there was that you have a 5-inch mid range where the FS is like 80 hertz. And so if you can, and then the TechStream technology was breakup free up to like 13 kilohertz as like a 5-inch mid range.
Mm.
So the potential there was there to create your own compression driver from that, and that you could have it go down to like 200 hertz and then cover the full spectrum. So I designed and 3D printed like 7 different types of phase plugs, and there was a
Which covered the whole inverted cone. Like
yeah,
you were literally putting that inverted cone driver into make it a compression driver.
yeah. Actually, I could just
But
bring it up.
um, so needless to say, I haven't heard about this project in like a year, so I'm assuming it didn't work out. But I was fascinated by it too. I thought, oh man, this actually could be really good.
Yeah, I'd have to see if it. Oh yeah, see if it can come up here with my testing. Uh, like it is this.
Oh,
If I could bring, I could have prepared it and had
yeah.
like the 3D CAD
That'll
model
be
come
on
up.
the next
Yeah,
live series. We'll talk about Troy's failures.
it worked, but there was a annoying dip in the response that I just could not get rid of. And looking back on it, what it was from was the surround. The sound was coming over the surround, coming back, and then exiting back through the phase plug. So um, it needed work,
Yeah.
but the idea was
Yeah.
strong.
Well, if we all could just quit our day jobs and just design and mess around with R&D on speaker designs. Troy's living the dream job.
Yeah,
So
yeah, yeah. Well, it's nice to have 3D printing And
Yeah, that's changed a lot to
oh, I
get.
should show the multi-cell that I'm doing.
I'll read the questions while you're looking it up.
So there's increasing market for interesting speaker designs for jazz kissa cafes. Various cities are, introducing, or it's becoming popular to have a jazz kissa cafe, and so there is a kind of a vacuum of innovation to create speakers for these spaces that are interesting, provide wide, even coverage to the venue. And so most often they'll do like a vintage Altec or a JBL system. And so I thought it would be interesting to kind of throw my hat in the ring and come up with a design. I'll just grab that one
Yeah,
there.
go ahead.
Like kind of the first one. Oof.
Oh yeah, see if you can see that.
Yeah, so this is 3D printed, and I probably could have just shown it on the computer, but it's
That's
interesting to,
okay. It's cooler in person.
yeah, it's interesting to see it. So all of the cells come back to a very small kind of area, and I may maybe I can show that in a future video of what that looks like. But the sound then obviously is dispersed through the cells. This is each component is printed to be small enough to fit on a 220 by 220 3D printer. And then it's just super glued together. It's missing the support base, which allows you to tilt it up and down, and sit on top of it and get bolted to the top of a base cabinet there. But the idea with this was that we printed this one, but the idea was that the front kind of 2 inch depth would be walnut, and then the rest of the horn would just be 3D printed, so that we just machine these front pieces and just glue them on, and it would look like a full kind of walnut horn, which when in the renders it looks really cool. The back looks really cool too. So the idea is that you kind of create like a statement piece that's people when they come into the cafe, they're impressed by what they see. So this as far as the sound, like it achieves um its goal for good clarity and wide coverage, and that's why I tested Trevor's multi-cell, is because I wanted to benchmark it against that.
The 805B
Yeah, yeah,
might be so.
yeah. And so Trevor's has like audible horn coloration, which we both readily admit that it does.
It
uh,
does, but it's not as bad as the aluminum 511 or
oh yeah, those are
811B.
bad.
Those are really
Yeah.
bad. The 805B is much warmer, tar covered on the outside, so it
Hmm.
helps a lot.
Yeah. So this kind of is halfway in between in terms of sound quality between the Altec multi-cell and then my ES by radials. It doesn't have any horn coloration whatsoever. Um, and it has treble extension up to 15 kilohertz. And so the only issue with this is that there is a dip on axis at 5K. It's quite a significant dip, like it's like a 10 dB dip, high Q, narrow dip. I don't know. I tried filling in these gaps, and even putting like cloth in between the gaps to absorb, thinking that maybe there was some edge diffraction occurring. That actually helped a little bit, maybe by about 3
Mm.
dB, but it still persisted. And so
Is it maybe to do with like the wavelength of this square we're
all
putting
it
in?
it literally is like the it didn't show up on yours. I think, um, but there's a distance difference. You have
Yeah.
multiple sound sources, and so when you listen to the on axis, I measured it out in CAD. The 5K is exactly the difference in
Center
the
to center.
distance,
Yeah.
right? And so it results in that dip, which is like why yours doesn't have a dip. I'm not sure.
Well,
Like
those 1950s engineers were pretty smart.
yeah, I guess
1940s.
yeah, that's the thing, eh? Like it just makes you appreciate more.
Yeah.
and more about
Yeah.
what they achieved.
It was probably a peak in the compression driver, and they thought, you know what, we'll just take that peak out by making the center to center a certain distance. They didn't have computer software to model that, so they knew. Anyway, are we
That's
getting close to the end, or?
it's however long you want to go. Are we getting comments? I don't know.
Well, you're gaining viewers, so
Oh, the twins,
yeah,
Troy and Trevor. We're identical twins, by the way. I don't
yeah,
know if I mentioned that. And so we should say about so whenever I go out, I'm constantly
we
getting,
live in a small town.
yeah, there's only about 5,000 population. And so constantly getting people thinking I'm Trevor. And so I have to correct them and say I'm his twin brother. But Trevor worked in a job where he was around a lot of the small businesses and got to know a
Well,
lot of people in the
yeah,
community. And so much more people know Trevor, but he never ever mentioned that he was a twin. And so our wives, like we've gone to
yeah.
restaurants and been,
My wife's redhead with curly hair. Let's just
yeah,
say, and
yeah. So it's this very obvious differences.
differences.
My wife's brunette, and so when we're around, it's the people are constantly like,
Yeah,
what's he? Is he like a player or
yeah,
what's going on, right? So,
yeah.
and then we went for breakfast, just the two of us,
We
and
walked in the door, and all the waitresses burst out laughing because they
yeah,
had solved the puzzle.
it had been like 2 years of them thinking that, and
They treated us a lot nicer after that.
yeah, they're twins. It'd be like the same week we'd be going to
Yeah,
that restaurant
yeah,
with two different, like
yeah.
it was, yeah. Um, okay, so I'm just gonna make this smaller.
You have to have it more to the left because
Okay,
you're in the bottom right. So can you close that
I
at
can
all?
just move it over.
Yeah,
So this is
version 2.0.
version 2.0 of the multi-cell, and it actually uses my ES curvature. You can see it kind of at work there with the flare geometry, and so this is on the printer currently. It measures almost a foot wide, on a foot, 28 centimeters by 28 centimeters, and so it's being printed right now.
Or
Let's
it
see
was.
here. Why?
Well,
Hold on.
it's still going.
It's gonna take 3 days to print. So, anyways, this is what it looks like on the printer. Let's move over to I don't know if I can move it over so you can see it, but it's facing down. And then I have the bigger printer, which has a 420 by 420 printing bed. And so it has the ports that it has to do.
And they break
Uh,
off when you're done.
yeah, you just chip them off and hopefully it'll still be okay. But um, so yeah, I
Very
can,
complex geometry that can only be done with 3D printing.
I'm going to be very, I'm hesitant to reveal this, but you can see here the starting geometry, how it uses the ES geometry, and then it extends out. So central veins actually are part of a mathematical relationship of coming out that way. And so if you've seen these types of designs, they often will just use straight walls instead of
Mhm.
the exponential. The nice thing about the exponential too is that you get a nice kind of concentration for the division of the if I move up here, you'll see what the potato masher, so to speak, looks like. Um, so if I improve upon this further, one area that I could improve on is making these fins narrow down to like what you said,
Mhm. Getting
right?
them thinner and thinner and thinner.
Yeah,
Because I
that
know on the Altec, it's literally just the edge of a tin sheet. So there's not a lot of opportunity for the sound to bounce back into the compression driver.
yeah, it's just yeah, so that's something that we could reprint and refine and get better there. But it is a nice concentrated area. As far as the acoustical wavefront is going to be planar, hitting that, and then it should distribute the sound evenly through the veins. Um,
Maybe you should explain to people the benefit of a multi-cell like this in terms of the coverage versus
mhm.
just
Compared to like exponential or
yeah, like I guess constant directivity would be a good comparison where this is pre-constant directivity. This was
yeah,
there to that.
yeah.
But why do that? Why not just do constant directivity?
well, there's a history there
Hmm.
of, you know, they started with this,
Hmm.
and then in the 70s, came out with the constant directivity idea, and it usually involved a diffraction slot that then would quickly go out to the desired coverage pattern.
Hmm.
And then there's been various refinements after that. But yeah, this is I do suggest the book, uh what's it called there? Horn Speaker, History of Horn Speakers, or um I'll post a link
Yeah,
to
that's a
that
good
book.
book.
It's a big historical book about the history of horn speakers. Definitely worth a read. So so anything else in the chat, or have we covered it off? How long have we been going for? Just over an hour? Yeah. Let's see in the chat here. Yeah, how does 3D printing horn compared to making it out of wood? Is the plastic similar acoustically?
Yeah.
Um,
Like, does it have that plastic coloration that you
so
could?
right now we're working on an infill pattern, and that allows you to do a fill material after it's been printed. The only so the horn I'll show you, like this one as an example. So you can section through the horn, and maybe this wouldn't be a good example, but normally there's a grid pattern where it's like 15% infill of a grid, and that grid is closed. There's no way to pump like an acrylic or like a foam into that. There is there is an infill pattern called gyroid, which actually was only developed a few years ago, and it's an open type of pattern that allows you to pump material into the horn and solidify it. And so that's something that I just recently did. Actually, I did a rear cover on the 65 CDNT with a gyroid infill, and that's under this Cura software. You have to go right into the advanced settings and actually do it. So you can see here,
So the intent would be to fill it with some sort of like polymer, liquid, or silicone or
mhm,
something that would absorb, be more
yeah,
of a dead weight to it, or
yeah, it would damp any
dampen,
resonances
right?
that might occur in there. Now, have I noticed sometimes on the bigger horns, if you can notice that the horn is like creating like a hollow sound. And so
You're
that's
talking plastic.
the 3D printed.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. But I get questions a lot about the wood material and whether that affects the sound. So that continues to be like a question mark for me. Our horns obviously are solid hardwood, and so they're very inert as is. But then it does kind of beg the question of like, well, what if it was like a really hard material like ceramic? Would you be able to notice a difference, right? And so that's something we've had ceramic horns done by
Hmm.
Trevor's daughter, where
Who's a potter?
she's yeah, so she had her wheel, and I made up a template for her that had the horn geometry that she could turn the horn on her wheel, and she did 4 or 5 of them, and that was something that we were going to start introducing like last summer,
Hmm.
where she was going to produce, artisan horns with various glazes. But she decided to move to the Netherlands,
New Zealand.
New Zealand. Sorry.
Unfortunately for me
Yeah.
and us, but
Yeah.
no, that would have been a fascinating project to have not just hardwoods but ceramics in terms of horn designs, and I think there's a lot of potential there as well to get into that.
If I had to guess, I would say yes. There probably is a sonic improvement with a harder material. But I'm just speculating. I have really no
Hmm.
idea. I would have to do an exact, and I did that. I have the wood version and then the ceramic version,
Hmm.
and it's sitting on a shelf right now, and I
Yeah,
just haven't revisited it.
yeah.
So yes, that is a very good question. Something that I will look at and see.
But you should know, like even though yours are made of solid wood, they don't have any coloration or like a wood sound to them.
No,
That's more in the design. I've heard wooden horns that definitely have a wood sound to them. That
because they're
in
resonating, right?
Yeah,
Like they're
it's
mechanical.
strictly design flaw in the designs that I've heard. So and Troy's talked about that at length in terms of preventing sound from reflecting back into the horn and that sort of
Yeah.
thing. And
Yeah, there's acoustical resonances, but there's mechanical as well. And I do think there's electrical resonances that can be there too, but
Mhm.
in the driver and that. But as far as a philosophy, my my goal is to have resonances low enough that it doesn't contribute audibly to the sound at all, either subjectively or with measurement, and then move on. Like, don't dwell on it. Like, I know up until this point, you know, I've just moved on, but I see other companies like Acora where they have their speakers made out of I don't know if it's granite or slate, and I've heard them at shows, and it does lead me to wonder about cabinet material, and there just seems to be this tremendous dynamics to the sound, and they're using really high end drivers like top of the line scan speak woofers, so that might be a factor as well.
Mhm.
But that's something too that I want to revisit is looking at for base cabinet materials and hybrid, plies and things like that, looking at more dense materials. I don't really want to get into it and just have it as a marketing thing. Like it has to be proven out, in a measurement way. Um, so
Yeah, weight's a factor too.
yeah, I saved my back and my employee Daniel, and don't want to get injured, dealing with these heavy weights and that. So unless we get like a hook, overhead
Sky, yeah,
crane,
crane.
yeah. So yeah, super confused when the when it started, not mentioning the twins. Yeah, Trevor's not involved in the business in any way, but he is definitely somebody that I have over at least once a week to critique and provide
Second set of
feedback.
eyes, second set of ears.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Um, and on that line of thought, like we have the Kingston Audio Club where I've taken speakers and we've done direct comparisons against, really speakers and maybe tested with a group of 12 guys and listening. Were you there for that,
Mhm.
right? And
Yep.
so as far as evaluation goes, yeah.
One of the questions, what 3D printer would you recommend?
We're using the Elegoo um
Straight from
Neptune.
Amazon?
I have the Neptune Pro 3, and then I just recently bought the Neptune Pro Max, I believe it is, which is the biggest. It's quite large
Do you have
there.
three of them now?
I have three, yeah.
Yeah, that.
So the goal I think for me is to do like a print farm here. I can have them up on the shelves running and producing more of the DIY parts like the horn there for the open baffle speaker. Doing that and and shipping them off, that seems to be a pretty easy, non-invasive, side business for us, that doesn't intrude too much on the day to day. And it's, the printer like this one, it just runs days and it's very low maintenance. You just load the SD card, you have the Allegro software, and you just plop your 3D CAD model in and it's extremely intuitive. It's about as easy as printing something on a printer, like a paper printer. It's not any harder than that. Just stick to
Maybe
PL.
for you,
It is.
mechanical engineering
Well, I
background.
didn't I didn't know what to expect when I bought it, and I'm like, oh, this is incredible. It's
They've come a
super
long
easy.
way in the last
Yeah,
few years.
I think so. I
Yeah,
think the Elegoo is like
Mark
it's
dominating the
it's
market.
turnkey.
Yeah.
Like there's not anything you really just stick to PLA. Don't go to the PETG material because the printer is fully calibrated as far as the thermal settings for PLA, and if you switch to the PETG, it's not it doesn't work that well. You really need to know what you're doing. You'd have to end up like retune it and stuff like that. So, but yeah,
I think that's probably it.
I get a lot of questions about the Fatale. I actually have not the Fatale 15 PR 400. Some of the designs on my site are just based on simulations in the program. And so with the Onken style at least, you can adjust the tuning to suit your room. And that but I have not heard the Fatale directly to know if it's better than the Bima. Technics SBE 100. Missed my question on the Technics. I don't know what the SBE 100 is. Do you know?
No, I don't.
No, sorry.
I'm reading the comments too. Yeah.
What was your most successful application, size, material, etc., with Mark Audio Driver?
Mm. I don't really like Mark Audio.
Uh,
I say that as
well,
a
you borrowed the CHP 70,
yeah.
right, in the transmission line. And what'd you think of that?
I
I mean, they're very
it
small.
yeah, it struggled even in a small living room. It struggled to do a decent kind of volume without distorting very quickly in the bass region.
Mm.
And I'm much preferential
And
for sticks.
it needed a super tweeter too.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah, but that was a while ago. Have their designs improved since then
I
or
have the CHR 90,
yeah,
which is the 6.5 inch one,
right.
and it needed correction. So that's the
Yeah.
plans are on my site there. I would say, um, like the question of like better than Fostex, it's definitely different. It definitely has a characteristic metallic sound with the magnesium drivers, and they
Mm-hmm.
are very directional.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so like with that 6.5 inch, it's very directional. Um,
Yeah.
So honestly, if you're looking at getting into the full range drivers, I should I should offer the plans, I think, for the wide baffle using the 108 NS from
Mm-hmm.
Fostex. I feel like that's a pretty easy build, and it's just like I don't think you're gonna get a better you're not going to get more out of that driver, and it's I prefer that driver over the 108 Sigma that's been around for like 20
Oh,
years.
that you're saying you like the NS? Is that
The
it?
NS is
Yeah, it's a
great.
good one.
Yeah, it is a
Yeah.
small wizard cone. It does not have like the cone shout at all because it's just a 4 inch driver. So I think it's pretty good for what it is. Obviously, you need to contextualize the use case and that it's for small rooms within 2 meters listening distance and that. So and then have it on really good associated equipment. Don't don't do class A B, right?
No.
Um it needs to be on like a decent
Yeah.
tube.
Yeah,
Uh
like an EL84,
mhm.
like a little low wattage tube amp.
Yeah.
Even some, I hate to say it, even some of the Chinese made ones.
The mini watt.
If you're
The mini watt N3,
yeah,
I know
this
it's been
like
rebranded, but I mean
phenomenal.
that's a good 3.5 watt
Yeah.
EL84 amp for that specific, uh
Yeah.
yeah, like it's gonna sound smooth and clear. That has good sound stage,
Mm-hmm.
much better than um, you know, entry level class AD. So, any other questions? Just gonna go through the chat again and
Most of the comments are about us being twins.
whoa. Well, let us know if you want Trevor to join again.
Hopefully you don't kick me in the comment section.
I don't think we're very controversial compared to many others.
No.
Um, yeah, omnidirectional upfiring. I think we covered that a bit.
Yeah.
Um, that it's really my preference is for wide but controlled coverage, like that 100 degrees is
Mm-hmm.
really the sweet spot. Um, I've I think we've done like Omnidirectional, have we done omnidirectional very much?
Yeah, I've heard omnidirectional speakers, but like the Bose 901 comes to mind. Is that the 90? Yeah, where most of the drivers are reflecting off the wall. Would that be
Even
considered omnidirectional?
like, or what
Or like
about
the Ohm Walsh
the Ohm
one where
Walsh?
it's
I've
like,
never heard the
yeah.
Ohm Walsh, but that I've always thought that that was,
Hmm.
great for classical recordings where you want to
Hmm.
create a very ambient space in that. But
Yeah.
um, yeah, Steve Guttenberg did the Ohm Walsh about 6 months ago and had some really good things to say about it. So it's interesting. I think it is, I think, personal preference.
Yeah, it's for me it's way too much in-room reflections to be you got to have some direct radiating sound in combination with reflected sound to get that perceived sound stage. Um,
Have you played any electronica through them? How do they sound for the C95s? I mean, one of my favorite artists is M83. They create like an ethereal soundscape, and they do a lot of movie soundtracks, and um, just being able just to crank that and have the bass,
mhm.
and it makes you just like that.
I would say with that type of music, you need a heavily damped room because the transient is like
It activates the room,
it
and
yeah, the
yeah,
music changes so fast that you need to have a room that'll
yeah,
quell those reverberations quickly.
hmm
And then in my experience, the more you do that, the louder you can crank it
yeah.
because you're not overloading the room.
Yeah, the workshop that we were working out of the basement for 5 years, and now we're into the new shop. Now the basement is a dedicated listening room, and I have just installed, I think 23 acoustical panels on the walls, all the way around, on the ceiling, and even up the stairs because I was doing a like a clap test, and it was like the
You're like Sheldon Cooper in the theater. Anyway,
yeah.
continue.
The flutter echoes up the stairs was insane. And so I just put two small panels going up the stairs, and then it completely killed it. I had Dominic help me put up the panels, and we were playing around. He was shocked at just how much one panel
Hmm.
improved, because that's something you have to look at, right? Is when that sound, it's like the recording that I have of the Taj Mahal, and they use those long corridors in the Taj Mahal to create like reverberation in the recording, and that's not what you want in your listening room. You don't want long hallways ricocheting and coming back, with the flutter echoes. That's the nasty. The flutter echoes are the main ones that I try to eliminate. They just really destroy clarity. So, but yeah, that will be something in the near future. I'll probably do live down there and show more of what I'm doing in that space. So it's 16 foot by 26 foot, I believe, with good height to the ceilings and that. So um, see if there's anything else here. Oh, autoformers. Okay, I did try autoformers, and I did a blog post testing the distortion of an autoformer versus just using a regular fixed resistor LPAD. And I actually found that the autoformers introduced distortion when specifically looking at the multi-tone intermodulation distortion. The autoformer didn't seem to offer any advantage as far as what I could tell from like a measurement side. So that the when it comes to autoformers, I find that you really do just gotta use high quality resistors, and make sure that they're at the right wattage capacity. So I'm using the barrel style from Dayton Audio, and it's their reference line. And they have like a shielding wire around them. I don't know if that's why they sound better, but subjectively to me, they sound really great. So that's what I continue to use. So somebody just asking if I've heard the small format DE 550 TN. Um, I've had the DE, one of the smaller ones. This is like 5 years ago, but titanium in general, other than the 65 CDNT, I've never heard like a really smooth sounding titanium compression driver. Um, so which is why, like in the small format category, I really do prefer the RCF ND 350, and it has a polyester diaphragm, so a little bit more forgiving there and a little smoother sound. So, so what are some of the modern off-the-shelf components you have a love for? Reasonably priced, modern.
I can tell you
So
mine.
Alltech, Western Electric, or RCA alternatives.
Um, Off the shelf components. I am a big fan of Paradigm Founder series. If anyone has a chance to hear those, um, are
This
like,
it's a small stand with a
yeah.
5 inch, right?
Well, I
So
have the bookshelf, but yeah, there's something about those, the beryllium, with the waveguide, the lens.
is it beryllium?
Yeah, it is,
Oh,
and it has the lens on the tweeter and the woofer to control pattern. Um, I think those are very underrated, and a lot of guys wouldn't consider Paradigm, but they're I think they've done a lot of research and development on those.
and they're specifically designed to be supplemented, I think, with bass.
The bookshelves are, yeah,
Yeah, because they're
yeah.
fairly high sensitivity. Since it's the baffle step, there isn't much baffle step in that design. So as far as stuff that I've purchased recently, like the Wii Pro, I think is
Yeah,
generally
it's a game changer.
I really, because it just works, right?
Yeah.
Like when you sit down and you want to listen to music and you really need it to work,
And
right? And
there's Spotify Connect and Tidal Connect, so you're no longer using Bluetooth or playing from your phone. Your phone is just the remote, and it's
yeah,
actually streaming directly from the Wii Pro to
yeah,
your
the
components.
Tidal Connect is what you really want
Yeah,
to
and
try to
it'll
achieve.
do basically uncompressed rate, direct digitally rate, like FLAC or WAV files right to your DAC of choice. So
Hmm. Yeah,
definitely recommend that. And I have three of them now, and I have my whole house is basically Weem connected, so that if I want
yeah,
to play music anywhere, I just open Tidal, I pick which room I'm in, and boom, like the convenience is amazing.
yeah. So another question, I'll have to get better at the chat part of it. Our screen looks so weird, but um, I'm just gonna.
Yeah, make that big.
So just okay. Somebody asked about shipping. Oh, transport of speakers from Canada to Finland are very high cost. So, yeah, when I first started my business, it was a major obstacle getting commercial, even just liftgate LTL to my house, and it was around $3,000 to $4,000 Canadian to have something shipped abroad. But after long discussions with FedEx and just hammering them with calls, asking like what I should do, they told me to buy a utility trailer and just bring it right to the Ottawa airport where it's literally loaded directly onto the plane. And so it gets cheaper, the shipment gets cheaper the closer I get to the date. So like if I want to ship the next day, it's like $300 Canadian where and it's 90% discounted. So it's like booking
Wow.
a last minute flight on a plane, which literally is like I take it to the airport on my utility trailer and then they open the bay doors at the airport and I can see the plane and they offload it with a fork truck and then it goes out and it sometimes I've had it arrive at the customer the next day, like a 400 pound crate. And so that's I'm hesitant to reveal
Divulge
that,
it. Yeah.
divulge that because now I hear about other companies offering having crazy shipping issues, but that's what I do. But it just if you need a shipping quote, like I just shipped to Singapore, it was very cheap, and ship globally. Okay, like we shipped horns to Belgium recently, and so it's not really an issue for us, and we pack the heck out of everything with 3/8 plywood, 2x2s, fully glued, fully lined with 1 inch styrofoam. And it's designed in SolidWorks. The crate is designed in SolidWorks, so the product just slips in and it's not moving around at all. So that's that concern. Yeah, Dali uses a material. So the Dali, is it Dali? As far as ironless drivers, there's one company, I don't know. Yeah, I think it's Dali that does ironless, and so they've obviously invested heavily into that technology. I didn't even know that when I was doing my own ironless driver. I would say is about 4 years ago now. And then afterwards, I was like, okay, that's interesting. Other people are doing it. But there's a lot of challenges to that, mainly getting the magnetic strength up in the motor to a reasonable level so that the sensitivity
Yeah, because
is
the
adequate.
iron is basically increasing the strength of the
It's
magnet, right?
focusing,
Yeah,
it's
it's
focusing the magnetic,
the
and
magnetic field.
yeah, so
Same with electric motors. This is the exact same thing. But
any issues handling wood during the winter and the low humidity? It's so we specifically use walnut. We do oak, walnut, and birch, and there's a whole list of other woods that we completely avoid for that reason. They have too much internal stress, and so that when we're machining it, it moves. So we
mm,
want low stress material, and so that's just something that we've had to learn to do here and avoid certain woods.
there's a question about Great Plains Audio. I've used them in the past to get recone kits, but that was in the past when they were more of a replacement
Mm,
supplier company. I think now with their own drivers for sale, it's quite expensive in my opinion. But all I can say is if you have some El Nico Altec drivers, keep them. Don't sell them.
yeah, yeah. Don't really have a comment on that other than it looks like their business model is shifting towards
Mm.
their own driver designs, and also their costs a few years ago, I think at least doubled on all their drivers. And so I think they're capitalizing in on the kind of the whole all tech. I consider it a whole segment of the audio industry where there's a whole following, and I don't really want to get involved in that segment of the audio industry. It's just not really, um, I want to focus on more of a broad
But
spectrum
you
of
want to
drivers.
focus on what's commercially available too.
Yeah, with the support, because I've sent them multiple emails and no
Hmm.
response, and I was told that you have to call. And so
Yeah,
I've called and I just don't get, I've left voicemails, I don't
yeah.
get any support. So
It's
it's like, no,
it's
can't
typical.
be doing that. So, but like being able to pick from a broad spectrum of brands like CS and ScanSpeak, but then using pro drivers when needed, and then like the 2800 speaker, you got Norway, Italy, and Japan. Right? So just um, whatever works for what I'm looking for a particular tonal characteristic from each driver. And that I think maybe is the biggest argument against, like a co-entrant design, um, where, with having all the drivers separated, you can just pick what works best. Like the Fostech Super Tweeter, the T900A, like that on its own sounds incredible. Like it
Hmm.
has the transient initial kind of bite that you need, like on cymbals and that. And then when you add the wood horn lens, it just takes it up a little bit further, right? And so you're able to kind of craft what you're looking for. But like with a co-entrant, you're limited with that, right? So
Here's one speaking along the Altec lines. What components, like reasonably priced modern alternatives to Altec Western Electric RCA?
that was the what I was saying, like with the
Oh,
Wing
okay.
Crow. Like I don't typically buy a lot of gear.
Right.
I generally just stick with, with the
I
exception of
think that in drive in terms of drivers, like I like the RCF drivers are pretty good. Um,
there's no, as far as I can tell, the Alltech Western Electric stuff is not like the holy grail.
no,
Like
it
it's
hasn't measured well.
no, and um, I mean the modern stuff is at the very least just as good. And and then in case of the DCM 50, man, I would be shocked if it beat that, right?
Hmm.
Like
Yeah,
even the large format
like
Alltech,
yeah, like
like the
I have the
288,
288
like it's
eight
just.
I have the 288 Gs, the Alnico, um, and they're good. Um, but in terms of sound quality, these modern compression drivers
Yeah.
are just as good.
One thing to consider too is when you're dealing with the small and medium and even the large format compression drivers, you can get away with using a titanium dome. I've done this before and featured this a few months ago. The drivers have such low distortion that they sound like too analytical, too clean, almost fatiguing. Adding in a tube pre that kind of gives you like a perfect blend of the second order harmonic distortion, softens and sweetens the sound to the point where it achieves your overall goal.
It's what people are looking for, but it's not the place they're typically looking for it.
It's the same thing with like Class D. A lot of people say, "Oh, you need to put tube front end on Class D," and that's been something for like 2 decades people have been doing. It's the same thing with compression drivers. Like if you find a compression driver that you have right now, um, don't necessarily dismiss it as sounding cold and clinical. Like it might just simply be that it's a really low distortion, and then it needs to be kind of sweetened up with something upstream. Um, so that's just something to consider. I the DCM 50 compression driver and the T900A and the 10-inch woofer. If you measure it, it's like a ladder effect where it has, sorry, you can see here, it has like the second order, and then third, and then fourth as kind of like a ladder effect when you measure the harmonic distortion. And so that has been consistent for me with my subjective preference is that around 0.4% of second order harmonic distortion is kind of the sweet spot where it starts to just make it sound a little more full, a little more, you know what I mean? So it's kind of weird to be like saying that like obviously I follow and I've even posted on the Audio Science Review site, and they're just hammering it as like a doctrine of lowest distortion possible. That hasn't been my experience. I find that second order is actually quite benign and actually pleasurable, and they do that all the time in recording studios. You know, they have their favorite compressor and introducing that. So, hmm.
Yeah, that's true.
Any resources on horns and acoustic lens physics? Um, Okay, I probably should put together like my library list of books that I have. It's a kind of a hodgepodge of topics because you have recording studio design, and that's one of the books that I have where it touches on horn speakers. And then there's other books on loudspeaker design that has a whole chapter on horns. And I've kind of pieced together uh, bits of information on the topic of horns from various sources, like even like I mentioned earlier, like Floyd Toole's book on small room acoustics. And then there's a really comprehensive one. It's like a handbook on loudspeakers and headphones, and it has a very comprehensive section on horns. And so a lot of the theory that I found, like particularly on like the Audio Engineering Society, the AES papers, and that a lot of the theory is not even useful. Like it's just putting you off in the weeds and causing you to be more confused than ever because it's like an academic kind of theory based that hasn't even really necessarily been proven out. So I'll put together a list there of what I've been reading and kept in my library there. So
Mm. Class D amps, do you prefer? We talked about the Hypex Fusion
yeah,
amps.
I
The
haven't tried the new Purify, and then even Hypex has their latest gen, and I haven't tried those yet.
Mhm.
So
What's the other Class D one that's in the plate amps typically? The ice amps.
the
That
ice, yep,
I I didn't really like those ice amps compared to the Encore seem to be phenomenal.
yeah. I think for me, if you're all about clarity and just I think clarity, uh, then the Class D is something to consider. But if you want tonal richness and expressiveness through the vocals, then it's been my experience that you really have to go to tube. Um, so
Yeah, I hate to get into the topic of tubes versus solid state or Class D. It's like a rabbit hole, right?
yeah,
But
yeah,
that's just our opinion from our experience. And
yeah. That's my
yeah,
personal.
everyone has a personal experience.
Every like you both sides are completely valid.
Hmm.
It's you can get amazing sound just with the FA 123 with the Weem and just be
Hmm.
done,
Yeah,
right?
that's like 90% there.
Yeah. Um, but what I'm getting right now with the 2800 speakers, and I'm using Lynn Olson's Inner B amps with his fully balanced
Preamp.
preamp, and I mean it's on another level. I don't know. I can't quite. It's full tube, right? And I can't quite explain,
Hmm.
why it is that the song sounds completely different. Like it sounds like a different song.
Hmm.
Um, so
It's not all about the sound either. You know, my experience with tubes is it requires maintenance and consideration and, you know, the reliability aspect of it and availability of parts. And you're dealing with heat and dealing
mhm,
with a lot of different things that can go
yeah,
wrong.
there's an appeal to the simplicity of like a Weem and a
Yeah,
Hypex,
it just works. When
and
you want to listen to music, it just works.
yeah, yeah. Especially if your system is just all digital. Not that it's just the products that I have here, the FA 123 and then the FA 501, they have analog digital conversion that you can't really go around. So
Mm. Yeah.
all right. So I think we're gonna wrap it up soon, unless there's other questions that are guitar speaker cabinets. No, I have musician friends that have wanted me to, and I have lots of ideas on what would make a great, guitar amp or, you know, um, but no,
Hmm.
not.
Yeah, I love the aesthetic of guitar amps and just the vintage style and look of them. I think there's potential to kind of segue that design language into home audio.
Hmm.
And you do see it somewhat with some of these newer retro looking hi-fi products, but I it's a fascinating trend where things are heading in that regard.
There's
Vintage is back.
in certain, I find that region by region, it depends. Like, you know, if we're talking about like an old school look, then it may not be very popular in Germany, for example,
Yeah.
but it might be Canada and the US and maybe in the UK. But definitely like in the European countries, I'm finding that it has to be more of a modern contemporary aesthetic. Asking me if I plan on offering more 3D printed. Yeah, definitely. The DIY side will definitely continue to be something that I can, new products, new uh, s- improvements on previous lines. We still got to do this 1309 Sabrin, take that, revisit it, and offer, any upgrades that I might come up with on that. So, which Trevor needs to give them back, so I can actually do that.
That's if you get them back. Yeah.
All right. Yeah, so I think we're covered off
Yeah.
a lot of the questions in the chat, so we'll end it there. Um, and
Well,
then,
thank you everyone for the questions. It's been neat to.
yeah, and make sure you click the like button just so that it helps with the algorithm. That would be appreciated. So, all right. Take care, everyone. Have a great day.